2024 may finally be the year that Scrap Mechanic leaves early access, and with it a complete survival mode experience. The latest tweet from the Scrap Mechanic official account says, "Hi Mechanics, we did our very best, but the next chapter still needs more work before we were happy to release it. But 2024 will be the year. Happy holidays, see you next year Mechanics." Now for those of you familiar with this game and its developer Axolot Games, you'll likely be skeptical of this promise. For everyone else, and for those that may have stepped away from the game, I want to provide a brief synopsis of everything that's been added to Scrap Mechanic Survival Mode in the 3.5 years since its release. With many similar early access survival games, this may mean a lengthy video, but that's not the case for Scrap Mechanic. On May 7th, 2020, Survival Mode was added to Scrap Mechanic. This was nearly 4.5 years after the game was initially released into Steam Early Access with only a creative mode. Now, at the beginning, Survival Mode was pretty bare bones. There were some objectives you could complete, but there was really no guidance into what you would want to be doing, so it was essentially just a sandbox survival mode. I'm perfectly fine with that. Having no guidance is fine as long as you can figure out what you need to do. Every time you started up a new save, you would always be loaded in near your spaceship, which was crashed. The starting area is a handcrafted area. Outside of that, there are going to be some main points of interest, but the entire world outside of the starting little chunk area is procedurally generated. The main points of interest will be in the same spot in terms of distance from or position from the starting spaceship, but everything around it will be different, so your experience will be different. The main objective of the game is going to be to go out and collect resources. The first objective you're going to want to do is repair your spaceship. So you'll be going out and looking for a battery to repair your spaceship so you can start crafting things. Now the game had a fairly robust creative mode leading up to this point, so there was a fair bit amount that you could actually craft when the game started. I don't want to spoil too much, so I'm not going to go deep into the ins and outs, but essentially the game launched pretty bare bones. It had a single NPC you could interact with, and other than that, there were going to be some things you could unlock, different weapons you could unlock, and basically it was just kind of make your own adventure and just do whatever you want. With early access survival games, something that definitely at least I expect, and I'm sure many of you expect if you've played them, is going to be updates after the initial launch of the early access period and having them be as frequent as possible in order to keep us playing the game and just making the game fresh. Now, Scrap Mechanic Survival did have 5 updates in the first month after the initial early access release. Most of them were just going to be bug fixes and some balance changes, no new content, but it did show that the developers were hard at work on the survival mode. At the end of June 2020, or about a month and a half after the initial early access release of survival mode for Scrap Mechanic, the first new content was added. That consisted of a chemical container, which could be crafted, as well as the ability to craft batteries. The biggest change in this update, however, was going to be the addition of cotton seeds, which could be acquired from the NPC I mentioned just a minute ago. The reason that was a big deal was, as you can see here, I'm finding lots of cotton in my world. Apparently, because the world is procedurally generated, and I guess the developers did not have it set up exactly the way they wanted it, not all world saves would have cotton either at the beginning of the game or at all, apparently. So that was kind of the workaround, was giving us the ability to actually grow our own cotton. Up to this point, the early access period for Scrap Mechanic Survival Mode was very promising. However, this was the point where things started to change, as the next update for Survival Mode didn't happen for almost 5 months in the middle of November of 2020. This update brought with it the ability to craft beacons, which were very useful for marking points of interest or perhaps places you've built. You'll notice the little oil icon up there is the beacon, and these could be accessed via the logbook, which was used for the beacons at this point, but also as a placeholder for the next update that I'll be talking about in just a second. The major part of this update, however, was the addition of oil ponds to the desert biome. So as you can see here, there's going to be oil down in this little pond here. Prior to this, the only way to get oil was to go into the ocean and basically dive for it. It was a very slow and tedious process. This addition, however, made it where you could actually basically get as much oil as you could possibly ever need, which would mean gas would never be an issue for powering your vehicles or other things that required the gas power. Now, in addition to this, they also added 6 new shirts, which were basically just cosmetics. But like I said, the primary thing was the oil biomes. Now, the oil biomes, kind of like the cotton that I mentioned earlier, these were completely random. Not every desert biome would have these. So sometimes you would have an oil biome close to your spawn, or other times you might have to travel very far. It really just depended on the RNG procedural generation of your map. The nearly 5-month gap between this update and the previous update was a precursor of things to come, as the next update to add content to survival mode for Scrap Mechanic didn't occur for more than 18 months, and it happened at the end of May of 2022. With the long gap between this update and the previous update, one would expect this to be the biggest update for survival mode, and that was actually the case. This new opening cinematic was added in this update. It's going to show you the situation you're in, where you're basically crashed on this planet and you're outside your ship, which is on fire. The starting tutorial area is relatively exactly the same, I believe, since it has been day one. However, there's been one major thing that was added to it. And that's what this update was for the survival mode. There were parts that there were some updates to the other modes, the creative mode and the challenge mode, but for survival mode, they added a tutorial to the opening sequence, which will get you to the first kind of major point of interest outside of your ship. So here you'll notice that there's going to be some icons on the map. And what this is going to do is guide you through the early tutorial and get you to build your first car and get you to that first major point of interest. Prior to this, you basically had to figure everything out for yourself, which in my opinion was okay, but for new players, I can certainly see this being a more welcoming experience so that you're not just blindly running around trying to figure out what to do. So aside from this, what you're going to do is it's going to basically, you're going to see here, it's going to just show you come in here, fix your ship. As I showed earlier, you're going to repair your ship and then you're just going to be along your merry way. They also added this little thing here, which we're going to pick up. This is going to be the builder guide. And what this is going to do is teach you how to build your first car. The reason that's going to be very helpful is because having a vehicle will help you get around faster. Also, showing you how to build the first car is, I think, a really good idea because while building cars in the game, once you know how to do it, it's fairly straightforward and you can build some pretty fancy cars or some pretty basic cars that'll help you get around. It can certainly be a little bit challenging. So that's definitely a good addition. I will say that my big concern here is, and up to this point, I haven't mentioned this was the last update for survival mode outside of some very minor bug fixes and I think some other kind of like small technical things. So I'm recording this at the end of 2023. It has been another year and a half plus since this update actually occurred. There's been nothing added to survival mode. The devs have had long periods of radio silence, which is something they're known for, where they'll basically just not say anything, they'll just say nothing. They have put some dev blogs out, which are kind of outlining what they've been working on. And the initial thought was they were going to do a dev blog, show what they were working on, drop the update, and do what most survival games do, which is kind of just piecemeal things and just release it part by part so that it can be tested and worked on. The developers here, Axolot Games, have decided that they're going to take a different approach. Rather than doing that, what they're going to be doing is they're going to be releasing everything they've been working on since this update and until the next update comes out, which they said is sometime in 2024, and they're going to release that all at one time. Now, there's positives and negatives to that. For me, the big positive is one of my big gripes with early access survival games is if you play them from the time they release in early access until they are finished and they end up in full release, you've probably experienced the far majority of the content, meaning when the full release occurs, it's kind of almost like a letdown because you've experienced almost everything. So kind of sandbagging most of the content for 1.0 is a positive in that when the 1.0 releases, there will be a lot to do. There will be a lot of new things. And for those of us who have lots of time in the game, we'll have something to do. And for those that are new to the game, there'll be stuff to do as well. So that's the positive. The negative is going to be adding all of that content because there's a lot of it. And I plan on making videos on it between now and the time the 1.0 actually occurs sometime in 2024. So I'm going to do at least one video a month on Scrap Mechanic. Just outlining kind of what they've showed up to this point. They're working on a lot of stuff. They've showed off a lot of stuff. I'm not gonna mention all in this video, but new enemy types, new points of interest, new things you can build and stuff like that. There's a lot that's going to be added, and the big concern I have is adding all of that at one time without having it being tested properly. Having that all at one time could be an issue. Up until this point, when they've added any new stuff, there's always been a test server, or at least, yeah, any new stuff there's been a little test update where you could go into the test branch, test it out, leave feedback, they would fix things. Putting all of this new stuff, and it's going to be more content than has ever been added to the game in one big chunk, in my opinion, it could work out, but it could be a recipe for disaster. So I'll have to wait and see how that happens. But essentially my plans for 2024, there's a lot of new survival games coming out that I'm definitely going to check out. But for me, my most anticipated game is going to be the 1.0 release of Scrap Mechanic Survival. I can't wait for this. This is the game that I have more hours in on Steam than any other game. And I'm personally been waiting for this game to be fully released for more than 3.5 years now. I kind of thought it would be a 1 to 2 year process, but unfortunately it's taken longer. So hopefully 2024 is the year. Look forward to videos probably on a monthly basis. I'll probably do at least one video a month on Scrap Mechanic, just kind of detailing any updates they release, all this stuff they've kind of outlined up to this point, and giving my thoughts on it until the 1.0 release, mixing that in with other games that I'll be playing. But that's kind of where I am right now. Hopefully you're looking forward to this as much as I am, and I really, really hope that this time the developers keep their promise and the game is actually finally finished in 2024.